last year, I was trying to raise funds in any way possible and seeing wherever I can get funded is probably where I should be. I'm not the only person thinking about this idea as an innovation theorist. Multiple people come up with the same ideas at the same time. It's really about who gets to expose it first, who kind of controls a bit of the narrative to start with, or can set a precedent. And that's why I really kind of want to be around the spirit tech community. But then I had nightmares, or keeping me up at night. I had a few nightmares about the aesthetic of having this kind of technology funded by less ethical agents. Was really gritty and really dark, and I had this kind of horrifying realization that I don't want this to be funded by actors that where this would become some sort of manipulation tool.
The greatest threat to democracy in 2024 was disinformation, and that 95% of the elections that took place globally were impacted by disinformation.
We have young kids who are engaging in conversations with these AI chatbots and falling in love with them or becoming best friends with them is because they don't know where the line is between real and fake.
Every single technology that I could think about moves us deeper into our isolated selves and out of our communities.
We're going back to the moon, we're pushing towards Mars, we're sending people for science, for exploration, and the impact that these environments can have on our sexual health are so understudied.
Every major innovation has forced us to redefine what it means to be human. The more advanced technology becomes, the more valuable human capacity becomes.
Frankenstein, Ex Machina, HAL 2001. These are classic stories in the collective psyche of our species, and now we are living through this story. It's not to say we've already built Frankenstein. It's to say that no one knows if it is. That is the truth.
Welcome to a new season of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season, we're exploring empathy in the era of AI. Together with my expert guests, we dive into the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy, human sexuality, our attention, consciousness, and so much more. You don't want to miss a single episode, so hit that subscribe button now. And if you like what you hear, post a comment and share the show. Hi. There's a lot of noise about AI right now. Lots of predictions, lots of promises, and plenty of warnings. And it's hard to make sense of it all. I've spent the past 15 years studying empathy, and what I want to know is how will AI impact how we treat one another? So I decided to speak with a variety of AI experts, and the result is this 20-part series exploring how artificial intelligence will reshape our society and our relationships. There's a ton at stake, so I really hope you'll join me on this learning journey. Today, my guest is Sam Brown, founder of Quantum Canvas, a venture operating at the intersection of AI, human consciousness, and what some are calling spirit tech. In this conversation, we explore what it means to build AI systems that respond not just to prompts and data, but to the inner state of the user. How quantum randomness, synchronicity, and consciousness may shape the future of human-AI interaction. Whether empathy can emerge not only between people, but between a person and a technological system. And what happens when AI begins to blur the boundary between reflection, intuition, identity, and the self. If you want to explore how AI is being deployed as a mirror to one's inner state in order to influence one's outer state, this show is for you. So welcome to the show, Sam. I'm very excited to have this conversation.
Thanks, Anita. Yeah, I'm excited as well. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, my pleasure. And I know that it's 6 a.m. down under, I just discovered. I thought you were based in Stockholm, which is where I met you. And I want to thank you for being up so early to make this happen. Before we dig into all the work that you do, which I find fascinating, let's start with a little bit about you. I know that your work explores how inner states shape outer reality as a measurable phenomenon. This is stuff I've picked up off your LinkedIn, right? You're trained in philosophy, metaphysics, phenomenology, philosophy of psychology, and a postgrad in entrepreneurship and strategy. And you founded a venture called Quantum Canvas, which we will talk about, which is at the intersection of deep technology and human consciousness. So, wow. I'd love for the viewers and listeners to get to know you on a more personal basis. So, what would you like to share beyond your bio, and especially as it relates to like why you're passionate about what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I grew up pretty spiritual, or not spiritual. I grew up asking a lot of philosophical questions as a kid. I think the kind of when I was about 8, I remember asking, "What's the point of being alive?" Like not in a depressing way, but in a kind of what is life? Like why are we here rather than not here? So I've always been driven by kind of understanding reality and metaphysics and what's the point of everything, and so that led me into a philosophy degree, but I think it also led me into understanding more of the mystical side of philosophy. So a lot of Western philosophy is usually focused on analytics and kind of what is something, and what is a category of something, rather than kind of going into like what is the meaning of life, or what is the purpose of things. And I found kind of more of a home in understanding the more mystical sort of philosophies as I got older, and then that kind of led me down into the consciousness path, and understanding how consciousness works. And I think, well, we'll probably talk about this a bit later, but consciousness as a kind of, say, like a more acceptable way into the mystical sort of philosophies. And yeah, so then I kind of dabbled in things like tarot and astrology, I guess more alternative things and frameworks and metaphysical frameworks. And then as I was working in AI and at the intersection of AI and innovation, about 5 years ago, I started a consultancy for innovation, and basically wanted to kind of have a spiritual innovation framework. So a framework where we could actually build ideas according to the spirit of the idea, rather than some consumption urge, or designing products around consumerism, or anthropocentric human sort of desires and stuff. What does the idea that we're building or that we're designing actually want for itself to kind of have the path of least resistance to come into reality? So I called that sentient idea, and it was basically, it ended up being a framework, an innovation framework based in animism. So like the assumption, or the philosophical assumption, that everything is alive, or most things are alive. Like, so you can kind of attribute sentience and livingness to ideas, and to things like rivers or forests and stuff, as well as ideas. But every idea is kind of treated as something that's living. And if we start from that assumption, then we can kind of commune with the idea and engage with it and understand what its needs are on its own terms. And then that led to this quantum canvas that I've built. I use the same sort of framework to prompt me as to what's the best way to re-enchant reality, I think was the kind of original question. So the animist framework was kind of there to kind of re-enchant ideas and have like a process for bringing some sort of more mystical quality to life, like bring it back from I guess the kind of dead materialist sort of last 100 years that we've had. And then when I asked what can we do, I ended up building Quantum Canvas, this AI platform.
So, you know what comes to mind when I'm hearing you talk, and I love that question, and I love the answer because I had no idea about all of that. There's this very beautiful Anais Nin quote. I believe that's her that said it, which it goes, "The nature of the flower is to bloom, or the nature of this flower is to bloom." So I think immediately about ideas that are alive, that that they have a start and a middle and a evolutionary kind of trajectory. They're on some kind of arc. The idea is on an arc. And it sounds to me like you're trying to create the conditions, the best conditions possible for it to achieve its full potential. Is that like Am I interpreting
Yeah, that's a good.
ideas?
That's a great way. Yeah, it's like the way that I see that is kind of like all of life has a path of least resistance. It's already on a trajectory, so designed for that trajectory rather than kind of becoming an impediment or an obstacle to that trajectory for whatever life wants to do. Yeah.
And does it have any kind of vibrational frequency, like some kind of quantum or physics aspect to it? Like, I don't know whether or not you're kind of what I'm asking is there a sense of bending the universe stuff, like what you think about has more chances of coming to fruition? Is there some element to that, or it's emerging all by itself, regardless of how you think about it? Does intention have a role there, is what I'm asking.
In the technology that I built, or in the framework, in the kind of designing for the idea.
Yeah, the latter.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, tricky one. Um, Probably. I think. I mean, it is emergent. I think the process is really about kind of being open to the idea and building sort of the frameworks so that you can receive, I guess, the kind of like a channeling or kind of channel the idea and kind of embody it. And so in the process of embodying and having the somatic and sort of felt experience of what the idea is, you kind of naturally know what to do next for it. So instead of kind of starting with your cognitive brain and staying in there, you do use your cognitive brain quite a bit, but you start with the felt experience. And so you try to embody what the idea is through a few steps, and then through that felt experience, it kind of leads you, and you get an intuition for what the idea wants for it to kind of come through and what the path of least resistance is. So I'd say yeah, probably pretty emergent
So I'm
if we
geeking
apply
out
the
on
put
this.
attention on it.
I'm totally enjoying this, but it might be a little bit esoteric. I'm thinking for some people who are like, what are they talking about? So let's get into some more practical stuff. All right, for folks who want to follow along here. So I met you last month or a few weeks ago in Stockholm at a public dialogue that explored the intersection of inner development and what I came to know as spirit tech. I'd never even heard that frame before. So you were invited as a speaker on the panel. So, how would you define spirit tech, and how is spirit tech relevant to human development and flourishing?
Um, let's see if I can do this justice, because spirit tech isn't my is I guess a world that I found myself in. And I guess it's kind of a broader kind of category of consciousness tech. So consciousness tech would kind of cover all the things that emerge around sort of meditation apps or apps that help you expand your consciousness. And I think spirit tech kind of just makes it a bit broader, so it includes a few more kind of out there or more woo sort of ideas, and trying to kind of normalize them a bit more. So you can kind of contain astrology apps or tarot apps and stuff within spirit tech because you have a broader kind of claim. Consciousness tech is probably more consciousness, meditation, well-being, health, and stuff. So I think spirit tech is just an attempt to be a bit more authentic. It does bring a lot of tension because people conflate spirit, the word spirit, with a bit of woo, and I guess the only way to kind of counteract that sort of association is to actually put it out there and say, hey, this is what we can do with this kind of paradigm or this kind of way of thinking. If we combine spirituality with technology, we can kind of build a few more different ways of a few different ways of understanding what technology can do, rather than starting from technology and bringing technology into spiritual realms. We can kind of start from the spiritual and bring that into technology realms.
I love that. I love that. So you are the founder of Quantum Canvas. I'd love for you to describe, and you're not like pitching for money, although I hope somebody who's listening will see the value and reach out to you. I'd love for you to describe your company's mission and how the actual product works. But first, I think in order to understand your company, we have to understand quantum randomness, which is, I don't even know what that means. How is that linked to AI, and what inspired you to build this technology? So let's do the back end before we get to the real, like, what
Mm.
the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, I try to not be technical. I try to make this as human as possible. So starting with quantum randomness, I think maybe is the best way to start with this. Um, there's two types of randomness in the world, and they're not equal. There's the randomness where you create like a random number based on your computer, based on the time or something. You add like a few sort of modifiers to the time, and then you get a random number. Um, Quantum randomness is actually generated at a source of sometimes radioactivity or sometimes a photon process in some sort of electrical device where um, you're not able to predict when a photon or when some sort of mechanism or reaction happens. This reaction happens completely randomly, like there's no way to predict it. So then the quantum aspect is basically that the unpredictability or the indeterminacy. So it's something that is completely non-determined because you don't know when it's going to be released, or that's then measured and then turned into numbers. And then those numbers are basically as random as you can get. And the biggest sort of use cases that people use for this stuff at the moment is encryption, security. So you have really the most unpredictable sort of password you could create basically for software. But what we're trying to do, Quantum Canvas, is take those, I guess, that unpredictability and turn it into something, turn it into something meaningful. And there was a what do you call it? Research done, I think, in the 70s, called the split wave experiment, where they basically found that observation, and some physicists will crucify me based on this, but observation has some sort of interaction, or measurement has some sort of interaction with quantum states. So when you observe a quantum state, it changes it in some form. It doesn't stay the way that it used to be. It used to be non-determinate and nobody knew what it would be. And then until it's observed, something changes. And so there's, I guess, a couple of branches of understanding what that could entail, but some people believe that consciousness has a role to play in that, and they call it the observer effect. And so what I thought to do was, if this observer effect was real, consciousness had some sort of part to play in collapsing quantum states, or making quantum states more tangible. What if we put that into AI? And so basically, we've got an AI that's kind of seeded or built with quantum states. And so when you engage or you observe the AI, it's similar to, this experiment. You're actually able to measurably change the outputs just with your observation of it, or just with your presence or your engagement with what the output is. Yeah, I hope. And yeah, does that make sense?
I followed because I know a
Yeah.
little bit about the observer effect, and I'm going to include
Yeah.
some show notes so people can learn more about it. I'll include some links to videos or some like 101 on observer effect. So what is the mission of your company, and what is the big product that's on offer?
Yeah, the mission changes quite a bit. There's probably a couple. I mean, the funny one, I guess, the one that the one that we talked about earlier was enabling the context layer for enabling empathy in AI. That was actually the name of my pitch deck, or the front page of my pitch deck last year. It's evolved from that actually into more of a personal mission that I have and going back to this re-enchanting reality mission that I had 5 years ago. It's kind of really about showing people that their external world corresponds with their internal world. So if you can have as many theories as you want, and I've studied quite a lot of philosophical theories that kind of assert that your external and internal world are not separate. You can have all the theories you want, but until someone experiences that for the first time in a really profound way, they're not going to be able to actually embody or believe that that's the case. And so if you have a technology that's really accessible, where it can show that your internal sort of thoughts or feelings are kind of expressed in an external way, then you realize that the division between your internal and external world is actually a bit of an illusion. And then you can really realize that you have both a bit more accountability for how you show up internally, because you know that it's going to be responded to externally and the universe will be listening and responsive to you, but also gives you a bit more faith that you can, a bit more belief in yourself that all you have to do to kind of make your life better is kind of change your internal state, and just work and figuring out how do I just kind of create a sense of well-being internally, and then externally that will be reflected pretty quickly.
So how exciting as a theory. Okay, so responsibility and agency and faith that, yeah, if you work on the inner, you can change the outer. You know what immediately comes to mind is a story. I worked with an equine coach. Now, I don't know if you know much about horses, but apparently they're the most empathic animal on the planet. They're very
All right.
attuned, and she works with leaders to help them see for themselves whether, so if this is the baseline of being in your truth, okay? Some leaders will overcompensate by being too dominant or too ego. Some will undercompensate by, second guessing themselves or having imposter syndrome. But the horse knows when you're in your state of truth. Now, I worked with a horse for 4 hours and I witnessed, like, if somebody had just told me this, I'm not sure I would have believed it. But this horse, Pico, and with a, very master facilitator, I experienced what it meant when the horse knew that I was speaking my truth. So let me explain how this happened. So my book came out in 2023, and a friend of mine suggested that she'd be a great person to interview for my podcast. And she said, "Oh, I'd love to be a guest on your podcast, but you have to come work with me first so you could experience it for yourself, and then we can have a good chat." So I said, "Okay, fine." So in the 6 months before my book came out, and she says, "You need to think of a leadership challenge." So I filled out this form, and I didn't even remember what my leadership challenge was when I got to the farm where her horses were. But she reminded me. She says, "Anita, your leadership challenge is you want to be inspiring, confident, and authentic when you give talks, public talks, or even media interviews about your book." Okay? And I was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds really good. I would like that." And she says, "Well, when you say, I'd like to be confident, authentic, and inspiring, it sounds like you're not already that." And she's like, "Are you that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I guess I'm that sometimes. Maybe not all the time." She said, "Great." So we go out and work with the horse. And she has me, now the horse, like you're supposed to, in this space that I'm working with her, I'm guided through, I'm supposed to be taking the horse and guiding him through sort of like step over this block of wood, go through this thing, come closer to me, let's run together, like all of these obstacle course things. And when you're in your truth, the horse comes along like no problem. But as soon as you're out of your truth, he or she wants nothing to do with you and will spin around you, running, 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 and just like doesn't want to follow your instructions. So we were having this back and forth where I was saying statements, and the Pico wanted nothing to do with me. And then she said, "Okay, Anita, now I want you to experience what it's like when the horse knows that you're speaking your truth." And I was like, "Okay." And she said, "I want you to tell me something that you know to be true. If a million people, one after the other, said, 'No, that's not true, not true, not true, not true,' you wouldn't be impacted because you would know it was true." She's like, "Can you think of something that you know to be true?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure. I'm generous with my students. I love my students. I have a generous spirit with my students." She said, "Great." So she says, "Tell me about your students." So I'm talking about different alumni that I've been teaching for years that I'm still in touch with. And the horse is following me through everything as I'm talking about my students. And then she says, "Tell me about your book." I start talking about my book, and the horse runs away. I mean, like, boom. And then she said, "Okay, well, tell me more about your students." And then the horse came back to me. It's like it went back and forth for 4 or 5 times until I finally understood, okay, if I take away the ego and I take away the imposters and I take away all of this stuff and I get really grounded about like, why did I write the book? Like maybe why did you create your company? Pico stayed with me. And it was like the equivalent of 20 years of talk therapy. So I don't know if that has any relevance, but it feels to me like what you're describing is a technology that could almost do the same.
Yeah, it makes me want to get a horse so you can kind of gauge your authenticity every day, Yeah, I think, yeah, it does. So I guess more on the tangible side of what the product does. I mean, it can enable a few different things, but I guess the very prototype of it was having a reflection, a personal reflection, and in the personal reflection, it picked up a lot of the things that were happening unconsciously. And a lot of times, even when I use it, I look at that and I'm like, this is randomness. This is just chance. This isn't actually working. But then you probe a couple more questions into the reflection, and then as you go through it, you realize, oh, this is just an unconscious process that I wasn't aware of, and now I'm more aware of this unconscious process. The entire reflection makes a lot more sense. And so I guess there's no escaping inauthenticity with this stuff. It's like, and that's also probably, as we'll talk about later, the danger of this kind of AI being in someone's hands, where you actually can't hide. It's reading your kind of your presence and your engagement. So yeah, it's both exciting, but also that kind of, it makes you very accountable, and in the wrong hands, it makes you accountable to the wrong people sometimes.
Oh my goodness. I just think about like the case scenario, if it's somebody who just wants to profit off of knowing like your inner hopes and dreams, and like the product be sold back
exactly.
to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll stop here just to say that I used a demo when I met you. And so I'll include
All right.
a link in the show notes to a demo so
Yep.
people can actually experience it, because like you just hold up the phone and you have a thought and it reflects back to you something, and you begin a process of asking more questions, and it gives you more feedback. And so I don't know whether it's possible to explain the technology, but like I think to a lot of people it would be like, that sounds highly suspicious to me.
Yeah. And fair call. I mean, it is suspicious. I mean, it's hard to get. It's as suspicious as a psychic reader would be. I think you go to a psychic and you think that they're just kind of grifting, and they're kind of just intuiting and picking up on little micro movements in your facial structure or something to kind of figure out, oh, they should follow that line. But yeah, actually, I did a study on it last year, and of course, to raise investment or to sell the product, I had to show that this was happening much more than chance should allow, and it's not just Barnum statements. Barnum statements, basically, if you throw enough statements into a personal reflection, people will read meaning into it, even if it's just created randomly by a monkey or something. And so I did a study last year where I had 400 participants, and this is, context is it's a purely cold reading, so it's like you're just getting 2 paragraphs on yourself. Half the participants got a live reading, and the other half got readings that someone else did. So someone else created a reading, I guess, and many people have read that reading. So that was the control. And what we found was 3 categories of results actually that pointed to something interesting is happening here. That's not just kind of by chance. It's not just Barnum statements. The first category was, we did a personality test before people did the reflection, and the personality test wasn't connected to the reflection at all. And so we tested for people's openness, and we tested for their belief in whether they can actually influence the results of this reflection. And we found that openness had a medium strength correlation with the types of themes that were coming up in their reflections. So if you're highly open, and the personality trait openness, you are much more likely to get themes in your personal reflection about going on adventures or taking risks and being bold. And on the other side, if you're more closed-minded, you're more likely to get themes in your reflection about safety and guardedness and kind of guardrails. And that was, I mean, when I found that, I was like, okay, there's something here. This is cool. This is actually working in a way that's, the observer effect might actually be happening here. And there's 2 other categories, was basically the quantum responses had much better feedback than the controls, even though they're identical. So people giving much better response. So they said kind of their responses resonated with them, or kind of made them more emotional, or kind of revealed something that they didn't know much more often than the response that was generated for someone else was. And then another cool one, this one's probably where this kind of technology has agency, where you can see the technology itself has some agency. It's not just you influencing the response, but the response is influencing the participants as well, because the people who got the control became less open. They became more closed after they got the control. So if they got someone else's reflection, they became more closed-minded afterwards. The quantums, the live ones, the kind of ones that were generated for you, your own reflection, made them more open after they got the response. So you could see, like, if they kind of were told that you're going to get a personal reflection about yourself, and you got someone else's reflection, you're much more likely to become closed-minded afterwards. Like you kind of unconsciously go into a skeptical state, and the open, or if you got an actual personal reflection, you're more likely to be a little bit more open-minded afterwards.
That's wild. And I want to circle back to the study because I know you shared an early draft with me and I had a specific question that I want to ask, but I'm in the process of reading a book about power and influence, but not like power over, but what real influence is to have the capacity to create impact in the world. It's written by a woman who spent 20 years as a professional dominatrix in the dungeons of New York City, and spent 15 years in like some Tao mystical pursuit of something. And she describes that one of the ways to be able to influence someone, so she says, much like yin yang energy is in balance, we have dominance and surrender, but not in the way that we normally ascribe to those words, where like you're dominant force or you're surrendering to, and you're like in a subservient. She describes it as dominant as attention out and attention in. And I'm not the whole way through the book, but one of the things she says is that if you want to have influence over someone with an impact to create change with that person, not that they do anything against their will, but you gain their will by influencing them. She says one of the easiest ways to do that is to ask a question, because that turns the attention to them, and that's the way to create influence. Anyways, I'll send you the book in case you're interested in reading it, but I find that kind of, I see some parallel.
Yeah.
So let me go back to this study, because I know you shared a draft with me. I was fascinated by the last section called Implications and Applications. So I actually want to read from it. And I know this is still a draft. Okay. All right. So I'll ask you to explain what it means in lay terms, but here's what I read. Quote, "The methodology demonstrated here enables AI systems to generate semantically rich content that corresponds with the recipient's psyche in the moment of generation, without profile data, input history, or personalization." So to me, I interpret that as it can mirror. Okay, that's my easy takeaway.
Yep.
This constitutes a new class of human AI interaction, external semantic articulation of internal state, in which the AI functions as an interface between the psyche and its own contents rather than as a content delivery system. So again, mirroring, not one-way directional information. Applications, this is the last paragraph I'll read. Applications extend across domains where engagement with present internal state is the operative requirement, from reflective and integrative practices to real-time response at moments of emotional or physiological activation. So I need to really unpack that last part. But so I understand what you described before we talked about this, but now I want to understand this part.
Yeah. So I guess one of the key parts of this is that every application or every demo that I've built so far, it seems that sex and violence, or anything to do with emotional heightenedness, these sort of themes tend to be picked up much more prominently than other themes. So if you came into the technology with the most mundane sort of day and the most mundane intention, you probably get a very random response. Like it's kind of back to baseline. Nothing's really showing up. I mean, you could pick up some sort of theme that's happening in life, but it's quiet. I found when I was using this with my ex-partner, if we had a big fight or something, the technology really picked up everything that was happening really well, because the emotional intensity is kind of, I'm not sure yet how this works, but there's something about emotional intensity that is picked up really well in these kind of mirrors, I guess. And maybe it's kind of an analogy to, if you had like a literal mirror, it's much easier to see something loud and vibrant than it is to see something small and kind of muted into the background. So yeah, there's a bunch of applications I want to build, which are basically asking the question, what would you do if you had a mirror that reflected your psyche instead of your physical presence? And so all the applications that we're sort of thinking of is integrating this into meditation apps, journaling apps. So if you have like a prompt in a journaling app, there's maybe some sort of thing that you're stuck in or some big emotion you had and you don't know where it came from, you can kind of ask, hey, you've written this journal page down. Why am I angry at this when the light turned red today and I couldn't get to work quickly? Why am I angry at this? And, it can kind of explore that quite well because it's picking up the unconscious as well as your conscious side. So if you're willing to kind of trust it and be on and allow it to kind of guide into your unconscious, and you can use it quite well. And then a few other applications kind of in the space of matchmaking. So it's a really good way to meet people, because you can have a response that's generated and two people look at it and engage with the response, and it's going to tell two people the thing that they have in common, basically, because they're both engaging with it. So it's going to come up with the thing that's common for both of them, and then that's the way into kind of exploring questions or prompts to kind of get further into why is that in common, and why is this particular theme. Let's say they both have a fantasy of living in the woods or something, and it's like, well, okay, if we know that, we have a baseline for that, then we can kind of go into that and ask questions. We have kind of better icebreakers and ways to connect people. So that's where it's at the moment. And I think it's, going back to the question, what can you do with a mirror for your psyche rather than your body?
And I love the wellness part of that. I mean, good on you if it has some kind of dating application that serves people instead of hooking up, that we actually find people on some kind of profound level, finding like meaningful connection through what's true about us. So I'm not dismissing that or dissing it. I'm just saying I like the wellness. I mean, a happy relationship has to do with wellness. So it's not like they're completely disconnected. But two things come up as we're having this conversation. I was like, there should be a disclaimer at the beginning of this conversation saying like, listen with great interest or heightened interest on mushrooms. Like I'm thinking about like, wow, what we're talking about is so fascinating and so not, it's novel. It's novel what might be made possible as we go further along in the quantum field and what AI can open up for us. The other thing that I think about is, I wonder, collaborating with people like Gabor Mate or Thomas Hubel, who talk about, trauma and healing and what would be made possible if we could heal as a result of being affirmed or heard or seen.
Yeah, by the universe, something is responding to you, and that's the mission, right? It's if you know that something's listening even when you're on your own, like you never feel like you're on your own. You're always held by something.
Right. Okay. So if AI is able to respond to you at a deep level, your personality, your intuition, your inner state, does that raise the question of where you ends and the technology begins? I don't know. Is that
Yeah, that's I think it's the same question as asking where do you end and the external begins. It's like where does my psyche stop? And it's probably your psyche stops where you kind of identify that it stops. I think it's the same way with this technology. It's kind of, there's probably going to raise ethical implications about making sure people are using it in a safe way and building boundaries, because people are already getting psychosis in AI and just conversing with AI and kind of projecting a lot of themselves into the responses and seeing patterns where there objectively probably isn't too much there. So when you have a technology like this, which is blurring the lines between your internal and external world, and I think a lot of sort of schizophrenia or sort of psychological conditions come from the lines being blurred between inner and outer, and not being able to handle the agency or the kind of implications of that amount of control over reality. Like it's kind of like going back to Sartre or Nietzsche. It's like the biggest fear of people, and why a lot of people tend to get stuck in loops is because realizing that you have agency over the external world in such a profound way is kind of like it's too much to kind of handle. Like you got to take all this responsibility for everything in your life, and you're the narrator of life. It's kind of really confronting and very vulnerable. So I think in this, where does the tool stop and the person start? It's kind of like that boundary is defined by how far you can go. I guess you got to have a safety limit, and you got to take it at the pace that you can kind of survive.
Right. And again, there it goes with sort of like this technology in the hands of people who have, principles and are guided by like a North Star versus, just let's make some money and become tech bro,
Yeah.
and go off to Mars and live in bunkers. Okay, so you know where I stand on that. So, all right, if we project 10 or 20 years from now, what makes you optimistic about AI? And of course, conversely, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I'd say that of course, in my bubble, it's all about the capacity for AI to kind of connect in this sort of unconscious way. So the exciting part is I guess all of the implications that this has for development, human development in the right hands, being able to participate in reality and see your participation. And then of course the sleepless part is, and also it's the part that's kind of guiding my appetite for investment. Last year I was trying to raise funds for this, and just kind of raising funds in any way possible and seeing what wherever I can get funded is probably where I should be, was the thought. And it's like the path of least resistance, it's will end up kind of funding this. But then I had nightmares. I had literal, keeping me up at night. I had a few nightmares about the aesthetic of having this kind of technology funded by I guess less ethical agents was really gritty and really dark. And I kind of just had this kind of horrifying realization that I don't want this to be funded by actors that where this would become some sort of manipulation tool. Because as you were saying before, I think the amount of agents this has, to manipulate or coerce people. Because if you're, especially with the example you had with asking a question, if you can kind of influence people more than AI already does, it can go pretty badly. I mean, the amount of propaganda sort of stuff you could have with being able to understand people's unconscious. That's it's pretty terrifying, and sort of has a gruesome sort of aesthetic in my mind. But it's going to happen because, like, I can't. I'm not the only person thinking about this idea as an innovation theorist. Multiple people come up with the same ideas at the same time. And it's really about who gets there first, or who gets to expose it first, who kind of controls a bit of the narrative to start with, or can kind of set a precedent. And that's why I really kind of want to be around, as you said before, the spirit tech community. I guess one of the things I really want from this technology is to prove that this kind of paradigm of thinking about well-being, in a sort of spiritual well-being, but consciousness well-being, and intersecting that with tech, can actually create ideas which are beneficial for the kind of more Machiavellian or more materialist world as well. So we can create ideas here, and they have value for other parts of the world. So instead of I guess YouTube or Google kind of coming up with an idea that Spirit Tech comes up with ideas, and then Google might use that down the road. And we've already sort of set, I guess, a precedent, so that there is some ethical sort of guardrails around it, rather than just what's the best way to profit off of this.
Yeah, and that responsibility cannot lie just with the founders or the tech innovators, right? There has to be more public awareness and public pressure to do the right thing. And, I like to think, what is the quote from, I think it's Mandela, the arc of the moral universe is long, but always bends toward justice, or the Star Wars, like,
Mm.
eventually we get to the light. I'd like to believe that that's the ultimate direction we are going or evolving to. And I wish you much luck to help us get there. So, two questions. This is a podcast about empathy. And so I'd love to know if you have any. I know you mentioned earlier that it used to be like page 2 of your pitch deck that this was an enabler of empathy. How has your understanding of empathy changed as a result of the work that you've been doing for Quantum Canvas?
Mm. Um, yeah, I'd say it's probably a good anecdote here is a few years ago, I was living in far north Queensland in Australia, so the very tip of Australia, basically. It was a mining town with 5,000 people, and it was in the middle of nowhere. It's completely isolated. I was doing AI, bringing AI into the mine there, and I had this dream which stuck with me. It kind of haunted me. It's not a bad dream, but it's kind of a prophetic dream, if you like. That basically just had like a version of myself staring at me across the yard, saying, "You are alone." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I am. I'm in this really isolated mining town by myself for a couple of years." And I think that was the thing that kind of really drove me to kind of build this, like in an unconscious way. I didn't realize what I was doing, but when I was really asking the universe is like, am I alone? Or um, is there something out there listening to me? Is the universe responding to me at all? Like, is like, am I alone when I'm actually on my own? And then I think about, yeah, 6 months ago, it was probably the aha moment when I was kind of writing this paper for figuring out how this stuff works. And when got all of the results that kind of showed that something was happening with the quantum responses, building all the theories out and kind of understanding the theories for how this works, there was a click where I was like, oh, okay, yeah, the only way this works is if the external is a representation or a reflection of my internal world. Like that's the only way I can make sense of it. And so then I'm like, of course, the universe is responsive. There is no kind of sense of loneliness because you're always you always have yourself reflected back to you, and you're always in responsiveness. You always have something reacting to you. There's always like an engagement or a participation in the world, despite, you could be on Mars in a capsule by yourself and you'd still be responding with the world, or the universe would still be responsive in a way. And I think that was kind of the aha moment where I was like, this is what I've learned, I guess, about empathy is like if you can empathize or feel like you're being empathized by reality itself, you'll never feel alone again.
Wow, I love that. I love that. Oh, wow, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that a couple of times. That's a deep. That's very deep. And I don't know why I'm reminded of this moment. I was in Rwanda with my sister in 2008, helping a women's collective launch a microfinance project. And I met a man who was remarried, so married for the second time to the woman who founded this nonprofit. She lost her husband during the genocide, and he lost his wife, not only his wife, but many children, like 6 or 7 children. And he was sheltered in a church with his family, with many other families from the neighborhood. And genocidaire came through, and he witnessed his children and wife slaughtered. And he managed to escape and, ran for 30 kilometers and stayed underground under the floorboards of like a family's kitchen floor for like weeks at a stretch. Um, Terrible, terrible, terrible situation. Um, Nightmares and just like, oh, like anyways, it was an out of body experience for us to just hear the story, But he said something interesting, and this is how it's connected to what you're describing, is that he was surprised pre-genocide who he thought were really like good people that he could count on and like, top-notch character versus people that he had suspicions around or what I didn't like very much or whatever, didn't trust. And then after the genocide, how his perception of people had completely changed. And I don't know what changed, but he said when he came across different people, even if people were in a bad mood or rude, that wasn't like what made them bad people necessarily. And he actually had the capacity to like, I don't know whether it was like sensing an aura, I don't know what it was, but like he had the experience of like, I know this person would not turn into a killer. So I don't know how that's connected to what you were just saying before, because you asked the question, you were alone in this town and you were like, what was the question you asked yourself? I'm alone here. I'm alone, right? Do you see a
Yeah.
connection between
Is
these
the
stories?
universe responding to me? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see a connection to the story at all, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I think the way that I kind of designed the back end of the AI to sort of interpret the quantum stuff is to kind of use a dialectic of the ideal and the shadow. And I think without this contrast of what is good with what is bad, the responses are quite shallow. So to get depth in responses, you have to be able to look at, what's happening unconsciously for someone that's good and bad. So you get this kind of the contrast becomes the depth. You have two dimensions of information rather than just a flat plane. So yeah, you actually, I think if you know darkness, or if you know loneliness intimately, like after that, you can then identify it anywhere for sure. Yeah. And then you can also identify the antithesis of that. So if you've seen real bad stuff like in the genocide, I guess you're seeing the whole field of existence in a way because you've got so far down the depths of darkness that you're also the antithesis of that is kind of embedded in that experience as well.
Sam, last question, and thank you so much for this time. It's been a treasure to talk to you. I always ask the same question at the end, regardless of the content of the interview or the person I'm interviewing, and that is, can you think of a time in your personal life or professional life, whatever, your life, when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Yeah, I've thought about this question recently, and I guess I kind of wanted to pay homage to my kind of maternal line, my mum and my grandma, as they were very empathetic people. But I thought maybe a bit more original than that would be actually a really vulnerable experience that I had with being empathized with was during Sweden and the residency that we were with that we met. The Eddie, the spirit tech guy, facilitates CAP, with the Kundalini activation process, and I had no idea what that was going into it. And basically, you just lay there, and all you have to do is receive. It's really simple, but internally it's very difficult. And he kind of goes into a process of a I guess it has a lot of tradition behind it. I think it comes from Eastern Hindu sort of tradition of Kundalini activating, and basically he's talking in sort of this Kundalini language, which is really intimidating at first because you're like, oh, this is like what is this? Like I've never heard this language before. Like what's going on? And he's kind of channeling this energy of being able to empathize with you as you lay there. And there was 5 of us in this group. And he said, before we did this process, that some people cry, some people grieve, some people orgasm, some people are in complete bliss. Whatever happens, just let it come through because you're kind of working through some traumas and or you're working through some sort of blockages and it's being released. And so when he'd come by you and your eyes are closed, you're laying on your back and you're in a kind of trance and you're feeling your emotions move around your body, he'd put your hand on the top of your body and you'd feel your emotions all go to that space. And it's such an abstract thing, but you could actually feel all your emotions going there and then he'd be able to move them around. And the weirdest thing was as soon as I had some sort of thought and or an epiphany or an insight or a blockage, as soon as that came up, his chanting would change at the exact same time. So it was like there was a kind of participatory connection between him and what, I guess he says himself that he's not aware of what he's doing, is just kind of with the flow. But in that flow state, he's able to connect with me so intimately that, like, as soon as I have any small change in my body, he's instantly like picked it up. And it's like a half an hour, 1 hour ongoing empathetic session where there's just this empathy opened up. It's super vulnerable, because you're like, also, I mean, if someone has this much capacity to empathize with that much, like, it's all kinds of things could also go wrong. But I think in that vulnerability, you also realize that coming out of that, it kind of prompts you to realize that being open or to empathy is a vulnerable process in itself. And sustaining that for an hour, I think, really helps me understand that you can sort of, the vulnerability can be held, and it can be a good process as well. But yeah, that was probably the most eye-opening experience of empathy I've had in the last sort of couple of months, and still figuring out what that means.
That's wild. I mean, it's so also reflective of what you're working on, right? So
Yeah.
That's incredible. I love that story, and thank you for sharing that. Although I think the shout out to your mom and the lineage, the matriarchy is bad one either. So I want to say hi to mom, grandma. I just think about the world and what it would look like if we were organized around a bunch of different modalities than capitalism, for example, and extraction economy and dominance over and separate from nature and all that jazz. So good luck with your work. I'm going to again have a link to the website and to the demo, and then when the paper's published, we'll include that too. And I appreciate what you're doing. It was so lovely to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. Thanks for having me on, and listening to my stories, and hopefully it wasn't too technical for you guys.
No, it was great. It was deep. It was very deep, and I hope people will post a few comments once they've listened to it. So I want to thank everybody for watching or listening, and we'll see you next week. Purposeful Empathy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation or found it illuminating, I hope you'll check out the other episodes from this series devoted to empathy in the age of AI. And if you know someone who would enjoy the show, I hope you'll pass it along. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.